Hello people that check out my channel. You may have noticed I've done a lot of anamorphic videos lately, and so I figured I would share a bit of my process for what I'm using and kind of how I figured out how to set it up. I know that I didn't have a whole lot of resources trying to figure this out myself when I was looking for YouTube videos, so maybe this would help somebody else, specifically if somebody went the route of the Cinelux like me. You can find them on eBay for still pretty cheap. I would say less than 300 Canadian. You'd have a few options. So with the skyrocket with some of these anamorphic scopes, this has been one that's remained pretty achievable without a huge investment. The front variable adapter will be the investment. You can get something for cheaper. This is and the other clamps. Here's the clamp. I found one, this is for the some Sigma lens, it says on it. And I had a Nikon one that was for a different lens that I was using, another vintage lens. But it was like 69 millimeters. It was just too tight. It wouldn't fit in there. So I think something of 70 millimeters would be ideal. This one's a little bit too big. I think it's like meant for something 71 millimeters or 72. And I have to use hockey tape to kind of get it snug in there. Otherwise it would just be too loose. And then I'm using a small rig matte box mount for rails. And so it's adjustable. You can adjust the height, which is really useful. And then you can just slide it on and off very easily. A little bit of tension in there. Like it's not the open design, it's the circuit, like the rails just slide through the circle there. So it's a little bit tighter that way, but it also lines it up right off the bat. You don't have to tighten it to get it lined up. Here's the rear collar. If you look on eBay, this is where I got it from. I bought the rear is the same either way, and so and that was about, was it 55 British pounds originally. So it has those. I bought the one that was made for the SLR Magic rangefinder front focuser because you could get that for less than $300 US. And that seemed to be the cheapest way to go for single focus solution. In the end, I wasn't quite happy enough with it. It had a bit of vignetting, but mostly it was just the top quarter or top third and bottom third of the screen were kind of quite distorted or fuzzy from it, and so just didn't have the clarity that what would I eventually go with. The Rapido, which I've been really happy with, unfortunately I've seen that it's almost doubled in price in the last few months since I got it. I got it less than a month from when I ordered it, but now I see that it has a 3-month wait time, and it is now $1,500 US. So I don't know whether I would recommend it now at that price. It is great. This is the 24A, so it's large enough that it doesn't cause any vignetting beyond what the scope would cause itself. So I had sanded the collar to get so it would go on further, on deeper, and try and get that as close as possible. And so this is how things would attach together. Typically, I'll show you on the actual camera setup in a second, but this whole thing can slide onto the rails now. You could put just a tripod plate on the bottom of that as well if you just had a little tiny camera that you wanted, or a light camera that you wanted to attach to the back of it and get the center of gravity over top of the scope. But yeah, I typically get the taking lens on the camera and then slide this whole thing on and then tighten those screws by hand after I've adjusted the infinity focus. So let's just take a look at the rig. I've used the Panasonic S1 because I can use Blackmagic RAW with a recorder. Unfortunately, the S1 doesn't have its own cage that I could find anywhere. It uses the S1H cage, which pretty much fits, except for it doesn't have an eyelet on the left. So then what you're stuck doing is you have this wobble. It's not very tight, especially when you have a lot of weight on there, which ends up happening. You can't really avoid it with an anamorphic setup, in my case. So I have this magic arm off the back of the handle going to the battery plate just to add a lot of rigidity, and it helps a lot. So that's how I solved that lack of eyelet. I actually had to grind away the cage in order for the eyelet that is on the S1 that kind of angles forward it actually bumps up at the cage too early, so I had to grind off a bit of the cage right where the eyelet would go in, that eyelet post. It's a 77 millimeter thread, so I'm getting adjusting from whatever my lens is directly to 77, just eliminating any extra distance. You can, because you want to get that lens as close to the front of that or to the back of the scope as possible. This lens here's a old Jupiter 9 from the early 60s. So I'm using a direct step-up ring from 49 millimeter to 77 millimeter, which I can attach directly to the back of the scope, so I can get that butted right up against each other. I can slide on the scope with the front variable diopter, and here I'm just going to put the follow focus on, that attaches to the front variable diopter. And then what we have to do is we still have to get the infinity set. So the infinity is set on the scope, and so we need to match that infinity on the taking lens. And so we'll dial that in a second. So that's why I haven't tightened those screws yet. What I found that would work is, because this front variable diopter is so large at the front, it's 114 millimeters in width. So there's actually can't be, it's not the threads, it's actually the actual width of it. So to adapt it to any kind of matte box, you're not going to be able to clamp any on that I could figure out. But I did have to upgrade my matte box to an even bigger one, which I've been happy with, because with this kind of setup, the clamp-on ones just look ridiculously small, and they're not really as functional with being able to use ND filters. So these feed the ND filters near the back. There's a little door that opens, and I can feed in two 4x5.65 ND filters. I bought the small ring ones that I've been really happy with. They've been on sale typically for around 150 Canadian as I got the second one. There's two different strengths that you can get. So I had one stronger, that 4-stop before, then I bought the 2-stop more recently. And so that allows me to combine the two of them. So I can go anywhere between 0, 2, 4, or 6 stops of ND now with just the two ND filters. So yeah, the smaller ones have been great. And so then this is how I would set up the infinity focus. So what I actually will, because I already have the scope set to infinity, now I focus with the variable diopter on something that's pretty close, near the minimum focus distance, and try to focus on something. And then I use the taking lens, and I go at infinity, and I know it'll be somewhere either right at infinity or just backed off a little bit to kind of sharpen it up. And it doesn't take that much difficulty, kind of just rock it back and forth a couple times, and then once it's set, then I make sure that the scope is butted right up against, that it's right inside that collar, tighten up the collar, and we're good to go. So now this is what it would be like to change taking lenses. The process is I have to remove the matte box, pull the follow focus off or slide it forward, and then after I've loosened the screws, then I can slide the scope forward, and there's usually a little bit of suction in there that's holding it on, and then I can remove the taking lens. Then I'll unscrew that clamp off of the step-up ring and screw it on to my next lens. So here we have another one that has it's already stepped up to 77, directly from I think 55 millimeter 77. Buying those is it really helps, because even step-up rings create more distance, and then you can create more vignetting in your shot. So then I screw the clamp back into the next 77 millimeter one, and then I can slide the scope back in. And once it's all been adjusted for height, it should be the same for your setup. And so I don't have to make those adjustments very often. Even the orientation of the scope, once it's clamped in there and it's been adjusted and it's set, then I haven't had to adjust it in months now. I just keep the scope in that lens collar all the time. So I put the focuser back in and get the matte box back on and screw it on. So I do have a kind of a rubber donut for that matte box, but I've basically just been using Anamorphic all the time, and so I have to use just this. It's basically just Gorilla duct tape around the outside edge just to create a bit of a light seal. And then the other thing that maybe I wish somebody had explained, maybe saved me a few minutes to find this out, is in DaVinci Resolve. Anyway, when you bring your footage in, you just gotta change your pixel aspect ratio. I just go to 2.0, and that will de-squeeze it once it's in my media pool. And then you can kind of see what it looks like. And then you also may change your project aspect ratio to typically in Resolve there's the 2.39 set as a default, and so that's what I typically will go with. And then you can kind of, within your timeline, you can go in and you can zoom in to fill up that full vertical pixels of the shot. And so this is the kind of my setup and kind of the process of how I've got things clamped together. I know you can do front metal jackets and things like that, but I haven't so far seen the need for it. I don't mind seeing a bit of the gold of the Cinelux, so yeah, that's the setup. I've been really happy. I've come to the point now where I just love the look of Anamorphic right now. At this point, any show I watch, if I really like the look, I usually look up what it's made from, and often I keep finding the Panavision C Anamorphics from the 60s are often being used, and all the ones that I've been really impressed with the look of.